Hi guys. Yeah, I'm here. I start the live stream a few minutes sometimes before I actually turn the camera on, just to have like all the information typed out. But let me know. Can you hear me and everything's good? Hi, Jemin. Hi, Anthony. Okay, cool. Sounds good. Yeah, you guys are early, first to arrive, so good. We'll be starting at 4, of course. So just a little bit of a kind of gap for the moment until we get to 4 p.m. And I'm able to type notes in the chat this time. There was some kind of glitch, I suppose, last time, but you see my typed note wherever I wrote. Um, oh, hey, you think you saw me today? You might have. I was on campus for a while from like 8:30 till 10. So you might have seen me. I was wearing this sweater. So yeah, I was on the 6th floor. That's right. So then you must have passed me. It didn't take note of you, I guess, because we haven't been introduced in person yet. But I'm glad that you noticed me there. That's cool. Hi, Santino. Hi, Jasmine. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Michelle. Kitties. Cats. Let me go. They're fighting with each other. Let them play fighting. We'll be right back. No, guys. Hey, no. All right. Yeah, back. So to anybody that's watching this on delay, taped recorded version, I guess you would skip till around the 11-minute mark or whatever, and that's when the talk will start. Hi, Nick. Eddie. You hear him crying over there. He's just causing a ruckus, but it's all right. Hi, Leanne. Am I taking note of who's here? Yes. Laughing out loud? Why is that funny? I mean, yeah, I'm definitely taking note. Hey, Mary Jane. Yeah, I don't know. Some people don't attend class, but they should be. I mean, it's a synchronous class, but I don't have magic powers to force people to do things that they don't want to do. So, but you understand, you're supposed to be here. It's part of the nature of the class to attend and participate, and see the live lecture. The people that aren't here are not going to do very well. So, I mean, you get what you deserve. But if I did have some magical powers, I would use them to create good in the world, I hope. Yeah, not just to make myself rich. You ask, are people not showing up? Honestly, I mean, the numbers have been okay. Um, I've noticed them in the mid 30s in a couple cases, which I think is close to the enrollment of the class. So I'm not too picky and choosy about a couple of absences. Sometimes when people are absent, they've been emailing me to let me know the reason. So, I have a lot of communications going with all the different class members. Hey, Elena. Okay, just a couple more minutes, 4 minutes or so. Welcome everybody that's getting here. No worries, just about 3 minutes, everybody. Hey Zach, welcome back. Hey Sandra, welcome. Good to see you. Jasmine, good afternoon to you too. Just another few moments and we'll be ready to go. Hey now, Natalia, thank you. Daniel, welcome back. Good to see you. Almost to the top of the hour. Just hang in there for another 30 seconds, and then I'll get going for us. Okay, guys. Well, we're pretty much now at 4 p.m. So welcome back. Good to see everyone. Hope you've been having a good couple days since Tuesday and everything. It seems probably like most of you that are present have already given some kind of comment in the chat, but if you haven't yet, feel free to tap into the chat really fast to sort of verify your attendance. I am keeping track of attendance. To those watching this, whether live or recorded, you've got to attend the live lectures. There could be penalties applied to you if you don't attend the live lectures a sufficient number of times. So anyway, good to see everybody, and welcome back, Julian and all the rest. So let's kind of just pick up where we left off. On Tuesday, we were in the middle of finishing the article by Mary Ann Warren. So we're going to go back into Mary Ann Warren for a moment and finish off the rest of those notes. Mary Ann Warren and her article on the moral and legal status of abortion. So there it is in the chat. Now the chat interface is working on my side. Unlike last time, we had a little bit of a technical issue. So yeah, Mary Ann Warren on the moral and legal status of abortion. Let me see to those attending. What would you say you remember about the beginning? So as she starts off a paper, she goes into this discussion about how we need to determine who are the members of the moral community. And one suggestion is this: anything that's genetically human. But she finds that to be a faulty argument, and she directs our attention to this kind of standard pro-life argument. So I'm going to put that in the chat so that we can remember the premises and the conclusion. So the first premise of the argument was, it is wrong to kill an innocent human being. Second premise, fetuses are innocent human beings. Therefore, hi, Andrea. So just and welcome back, Tyler, as well. You see the elements of the argument that I just typed into the chat. The first premise, it's wrong to kill an innocent human being. The second premise, fetuses are innocent human beings. Therefore, it's wrong to kill a fetus. Now, this is a standard pro-life argument. But what's the problem with the argument, according to Warren? Does somebody remember that? I'll, of course, explain again, but I thought I would just check with you, anyone that has good notes or memory following the discussion. Let me ask, what was the problem with this argument? Even though on a first glance it looks like it's a logical argument, valid argument, what's wrong? We talked about this issue with the argument, basically. Someone may know. Let's just take it from there. Two fallacies begging the question and equivocation. Okay, genetic human versus moral human. Okay, good. So looking at the argument that you see written there in the chat, the author Warren says that if the word fetus, if the word human being is used in the same sense in both premises, then one of those premises would assume what the conclusion is stating, which is that abortion is wrong. So we remember there's these two different senses of the word human. Okay, so one of them is the moral sense. Moral sense means a member of the moral community with full and equal rights. And the genetic sense just merely means to have human DNA. So look at the first premise. It says it's wrong to kill an innocent human being. That's only uncontroversially true. It only avoids begging the question or assuming the conclusion if what's intended there is the moral sense. It's wrong to kill an innocent human being in the moral sense does not imply that it's wrong to kill anything that's just genetically human. If it was the genetic sense used in premise one, then that would be equivalent to the statement that it's wrong to kill anything that has human DNA, and that would be equivalent to the conclusion of the argument. So to avoid begging the question, the first premise must be intended in the moral sense of the word human. The second premise says fetuses are innocent human beings. But in this premise, in order for that to not just say that fetuses are members of the moral community, therefore having full and equal rights, including the right to life, it would have to be used in the genetic sense rather than the moral sense. So premise one uses the moral sense. But premise two uses the genetic sense of human. And therefore, this argument commits the fallacy of equivocation. The fallacy of equivocation, once again, is when in an argument there's a key term that's used more than once, but the meaning of the key term changes throughout the course of the argument. One example that we talked about, just to illustrate the concept in a way, was like, say, Joe's at the bank, a bank's a financial institution, therefore Joe's at a financial institution. If bank was used with one meaning throughout, then that could be considered a fair argument. But if the first premise means Joe's at the bank in the sense of being at the riverbank, and the second premise says a bank's a financial institution, meaning it, of course, in the financial sense of the word bank, then the conclusion that he's at a financial institution no longer follows because we've equivocated on that key term midway through the argument, using it in two different non-identical ways. So if a person argues that it's wrong to kill an innocent human being in the moral sense, fetuses are innocent human beings in the genetic sense, then the conclusion that it's wrong to kill the fetus does not follow from the premises because human was not used in one univocal sense throughout the entire argument. Here I can read you just a little bit from the author on this point. And she says this here on page 126 of the textbook. So one reason why this second question is so frequently overlooked in the debate over the moral status of abortion is that the term human has two distinct but not often distinguished senses. This fact results in a slide of meaning which serves to conceal the fallaciousness of the traditional argument that, one, it is wrong to kill innocent human beings, two, fetuses are innocent human beings, then therefore three, it's wrong to kill fetuses. Because if fetus is used in the same sense, if human is used in the same sense in both 1 and 2, then whichever of the two senses is meant, one of the premises is question begging. And if it is used in two different senses, then of course the conclusion doesn't follow because it equivocates. So premise one that you see in the chat, hi Jennifer, and Amanda as well. Premise one is a self-evident moral truth and avoids begging the question about abortion only if human being is used to mean something like a full-fledged member of the moral community. We may call this the moral sense of human. It is not to be confused with what we call the genetic sense. That is, the sense in which any member of the species is a human being and no member of any other species could be. If one is acceptable only in the moral sense, and two is non-question begging only in the genetic sense, then the argument has equivocated. So, do you guys remember this term that's being used here or referred to, the moral community? Let me ask you again, the moral community is the set of beings that have what? Maybe someone will say real quick what that is. The moral community, it's a concept that's used often and talked about in ethics. It's the set of whichever beings in this universe that have got what? Full and equal rights. Exactly, Mary Jane. Full and equal rights. So now the question that Warren wants to pursue is, since this classic standard pro-life argument seems to commit the fallacy of equivocation, she believes that the pro-life advocate has to make a stronger argument. They have to make a case somehow that to be a member of the moral community, meaning to be a member of the community of beings that have full and equal rights, that all you need to do is have human DNA. But that's where she finds fault with the reasoning of the pro-life advocate. So the next question that Warren wants us to explore and think about a little more deeply is, what attributes are required, or what is required to be a member of the moral community? What is needed to be a member of the moral community? So her suggestion, and this is like a core claim of the paper, is that in order to be a member of the moral community, a being has to be a person, not necessarily a genetic human being, but a person. So Warren's answer. So there's, you see the statement typed out. The moral community, the members of the moral community, as Warren will argue, are all and only persons. This is a deliberately chosen word. Persons is the type of thing that you have to be to have full and equal rights to all the other members of the moral community, all the other persons. But the question now is raised, let's get into further analysis. What kinds of things are and are not persons? So here's the sort of logic of the argument so far. She points out a fallacy in the classic pro-life argument, that it's dealing with the word human being in two distinct and not equivalent ways. She thinks that means that the pro-life advocate must argue that in order to be a member of the moral community, all you have to do is be genetically human. This is where Warren doesn't find that plausible or intuitive. She says rather that to be a member of the moral community, you'd have to be a person, and that the members of the moral community are all and only persons, which requires us now to get into a little bit of conceptual analysis about the concept of a person. So what exactly does it mean to be a person? And by the way, just me trying to stimulate the maximum amount of attendance that we can get, I'm just going to put a little post on Canvas just quickly, just as I've done before, but it'll just take me like 30 seconds to do that. I've got another window open really fast here. So give me 2 seconds, guys. Thanks for your patience. I'll make a more fulsome post about this over the weekend, kind of making clear the attendance policy. But anyway. Okay. Cool. So I just put that one out there. Anyways, back to the live stream. Yeah. Not to worry, Justin. Good to see you there. Thank you. Okay, so we're into this point. What is a person? It's persons that are members of the moral community intuitively, but now let's kind of dig into it. What exactly makes a thing be a person? So one thing that you can tell is that me and you, we're persons. Adult, normally functioning humans are persons. But like, this marker is not a person. This marker doesn't have any rights. It doesn't have the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. It's just not the right type of thing to hold those rights or to be a member of the moral community. But on the flip side, you and me watching this lecture are definitely persons. So what kind of attributes or qualities are needed in order for us to have the status of being a person and therefore by extension to be members of the moral community? She says in order to stimulate our thinking on this, we should consider a thought experiment. Okay, so in philosophy, and this is going to be a constant feature of a lot of these essays that we'll read going forward, you're going to be entertained by hypothetical scenarios, thought experiments, and so on. So like when we talked about Kant, I gave you guys this shopkeeper example that he talks about. And when we talked about Mill, I presented you with hypotheticals of like forced choice scenarios, like suppose that 5 people will die if they don't receive organ transplants, and then somebody could kill one to save 5. So this whole concept of using thought experiments is a common element of philosophical reasoning and argument. So some of the thought experiments are pretty sort of, I guess, relatable to real life, but others are pretty outlandish and extravagant and different from real life. So this is one of those that's a little bit, to be fair, a little more unconventional, but it helps to make her point. So the question she asks us to use to think about what makes a person is, suppose that you were encountering life forms on an alien planet. So this is the space explorer hypothetical. Okay, so I want you to imagine this kind of science fictional type situation. You've touched down on an alien planet, not Earth, somewhere else out there in the world, or I should say in the universe. And when you arrive on this planet, you notice that there's life forms. They're not human life forms, but they're things that are alive. Um, Now, as you're the explorer, ask yourself, what kind of attributes would these beings have to possess for you to think that they should be treated with rights and dignity like humans that are adults are? Um, or what qualities, if they did not have them, would make you think, well, then they could be used for food or resources by me because they're not people? So you're asked right now to contemplate a sort of deep assessment of what type of features or qualities are needed for something to hold the status of rights, in other words, to be a person. Now, Warren believes that as you reflect on this, common sense and intuition will kind of reveal the attributes, and she believes that there's 5 basic ones. But before I put them out there, just in her own way of putting it, I'd like to see if anyone has any thoughts. Imagine yourself the space explorer. You see these life forms. What kind of things do you think they'd have to exhibit or have? So communication, one exact point that she does make. So that's one of them. Yes, communication. If a thing can communicate like we can using symbols or language, then you'd think it seems to have the kind of intelligence and power of thought that is typical of us human persons. So possibly communication is one of them. That's right. It's not the only one though. There's a few others. There's some that are even more basic. Not to worry, Rosemary. Like, thank you for being here. And reasoning. That's also one, Amanda. Yes, the ability to reason, to use critical thought or logic or inference to develop solutions to all kinds of complex problems or to develop maybe technology. Hi, Carson and Violet and the rest. Yes, Karen, welcome. Not to worry. Thank you. Natalie, I appreciate it. So back to my question, though. We have 2 of 5. The question on the table right now is, what attributes would you have to see in, like, for example, a non-human alien race for you to regard them as persons on par with human persons? Communication was one. Reasoning was another big one. Sentience, that's a very good, yes, that's also one of them. She uses the phrase consciousness, meaning just being able to like see and feel and perceive your surroundings. Some things don't have any consciousness or sentience at all. Like this marker doesn't have sight, taste, touch, hearing, or smell. It's got no sense organs or perceptual system. So yes, awareness / sentience, as she says, consciousness, but it's kind of all the same thing. That's a third. So you guys already hit 3 out of 5, which is awesome. Consciousness, reasoning, capacity to communicate. The other 2, okay, well, I was going to say you might not get them, but you seem to already have a good sense. This, Marina, you've suggested being independent. And she does include that. She says self-motivated activity, meaning that activity that you take on your own without it being done by something else acting on your behalf. Like animals, for example, can engage in self-motivated activity, but also humans. And self-awareness is the last one, yes. So you guys got all of them. I'm not sure if that's just off of you reflecting on the concept, which is pretty amazing, or if it's because maybe you read the text, but either way, that's very, very good. So I'm going to put them all in like one succinct list, and that way you'll see exactly what Warren suggests. So we have consciousness, number 1. Then it was reasoning, number 2. 3, she gave self-motivated activity. 4 was capacity to communicate. And 5 was self-awareness. And I'll just say one last summary about each one. Consciousness, the ability to perceive, to have perception and reaction to stimuli. Plants, for example, they don't have consciousness, so we don't regard them as persons. Animals have consciousness, but they're not possessed of some of the other qualities that are also on this list. But consciousness is a baseline requirement. Something that is got no form of sentience certainly couldn't be considered a person. Reasoning, this is one of the big ones, because in order to be a person, like the things that have rights and protections under the moral community concept, it's not just like, say, non-human animals, right? We eat pigs, cows, chickens. they have consciousness, but the concept of reasoning is something that they lack. They don't have the higher complex forms of rational thought that we have. So they are not in the moral community, even though there are things that have life and they can feel pain and pleasure and etc. They don't have reasoning. Self-motivated activity. Not to worry, hi, Miana and Marina. Your question is, does she claim they would have to meet all of them to be a considerate person, or is meeting only one enough? Very good question. I was just going to speak to that after I talked a little more about each one. But what she says is, she's actually a little bit ambiguous on this, so to some that might be frustrating. She says, I'm not going to specify exactly how many or in what degree they are required to be a member of the moral community. But she does say this: if you have zero, if you have absolutely none of them, then you're definitely not a member of the moral community, because that's just a kind of very easy distinction to make if you don't have any. And ultimately what she's going to claim is this: that the fetus that's developing within the womb has either none of these or so few of them and in such a weak degree that it is not more person-like than a common animal or fish that a person may not think of as a member of the moral community. So that's the ultimate upshot of this. That's where we're building up towards. But I think you can sort of see where she's headed. The main point is, you're not a person, you're not a member of the moral community with the right to life unless you're a person. And you're not a person if you don't have any of these attributes, or if you have some of them but not more than like farm animals that we don't consider to be persons, and we don't think they have a right to life because we kill them and eat them for our own purposes. Marina, you say, is having the potential to develop them enough? Very sharp question. Warren is aware of this potentiality consideration, and she's going to try to contend with that in a moment, but I want to get through the main line of the argument first. Hold that thought though, and we'll return to it. She does eventually say that to some people, merely having the potential to have all these qualities should qualify you as a member of the moral community while you're in the developmental stages waiting for the potential to fully be manifested. But she doesn't agree with that claim, and she'll give some interesting arguments to show, in her view, that potential is not sufficient. You'd have to really possess the qualities, not just have the potential for them. That's her view anyway. So yeah, communication, of course, is another one. The fact that you and I can speak in words that can express infinitely many different concepts, or to use written symbols to do the same. And then self-awareness, like, are you even aware that you exist? Do you know what you are or that you are alive? So fully mature adult humans like you and I have all 5 of these in ample amounts. We're conscious, we have reason, we can talk and communicate through language, we can engage in activities under our own self-direction and motives, and we are self-aware. We're aware of our own existence and our own being. So we're uncontroversially persons, at least us normally functioning adult humans. But when we go back down to the case of the fetus, as she argues, it lacks all these qualities, or at least doesn't have as many as, say, an animal would have. And therefore, it's not a person. Therefore, it's not a member of the moral community. Therefore, it doesn't have a right to life. And so in aborting the fetus, destroying, killing the fetus, you're killing something, but it's not killing a person. It's not killing a member of the moral community. It's not killing something that has rights. Gemma, you ask, or you say, fetus can have consciousness, so they are part of the moral community. She does not agree with this, no. I mean, if there's a form of consciousness, it's very, I guess, dim and weak as compared to like an individual that's already been born and is receiving stimuli from the whole environment. The fetus in the womb has never been exposed to any stimuli outside of the womb. So sensitivity to perhaps sound or light is a very minor form of consciousness per se. But she doesn't say that it's enough to have just one, and to be a member of the moral community, all you need is one. She says, using your common sense and intuition, like animals have consciousness, but we eat them. So it's not just having only one of these qualities, it's some combination of them. Perhaps, consciousness, reasoning by themselves could be enough, but certainly the fetus, at least during the term of pregnancy, isn't engaged in like rational calculation or thought. So that's basically her way of framing the case. Let me read a little bit more from my notes here. So she gives these 5, like we've said: consciousness, reasoning, self-motivated activity, capacity to communicate, and self-awareness. She doesn't say that you need all of them to be a member of the moral community, to be a person. And she also doesn't try to say how many are sufficient or necessary, but at least in her judgment and view, it's clear that if a being lacks all 5, then it's clearly not a person and not a member of the moral community with rights. If something is a person, then it has full and equal inalienable rights. But notice that genetic human is not an item on this list of 5 things, nor should it be. Because if genetic human was a requirement for being a member of the moral community, then that would mean that we would never consider non-humans to be even potentially persons, even if they were like smart, rational. You know, you've watched plenty of science fiction films, I'm sure, where there's like sentient and intelligent aliens from other planets. And under the concept that you have to be genetically human to be a person, it would be considered okay to like kill and eat those things, even as they're saying no, but you know, I have thoughts and I'm rational and I have every right to live. So genetic humanity wouldn't be considered necessary because that would be, some argue, speciesist. It would mean that irregardless of what other mental capacities or abilities you had, um, you'd have to be a genetic human to be considered worthy of rights. And it's also not sufficient, and that's shown by the case of the fetus, as she argues, but also other examples like an encephalitic birth, a baby born with no brain, or a person in a permanent vegetative state coma with no possibility of regaining consciousness where their brain activity has ceased to function. These would be non-person humans, and it seems, at least in science fictional cases, theoretically conceivable for there to be non-human persons. So that's why she thinks that genetic humanity is not a criteria on this list. But when you look at the actual criteria that seem to be suggested by conceptual analysis, they don't include the fetus, because the fetus is something that either possesses none of these or in such small number and extent that they're still less person-like than typical animals that, again, we don't regard as having membership in the moral community. Now, an objection to this argument that was raised by one of our sharp students here is that this way of determining the moral status of the fetus isn't correct, because even if they lack those attributes during pregnancy, they would eventually come to acquire them. So this raises the question of, does the potential personhood of the fetus endow it with rights, even prior to the full establishment of those attributes or qualities down the line? So here's this new question, the potentiality objection. Almost done writing it. Thanks, guys. Okay. Hi, Juliet. Not to worry. Good to see you. My late to class policy, I'm really not enforcing that, but I do like it when people are on time. At the same time, I realize everyone's got different complicated schedules and etc. So I'm not going to really be very punitive about that. But I do try to induce people by whatever methods I can to arrive to the meetings and be here on time. Not to worry, basically, long story short. You see here the potentiality objection I've typed out, and this is like, so she tries to raise her opponent's view so that she can try to set that aside with a further counter argument. Here's a current state of play. Mary Ann Warren says that a classic pro-life argument is equivocating because it's using both moral and genetic senses of human to get to the conclusion. She thinks, let's focus on what a person is, because she believes that it's persons that are members of the moral community, and that to be a person, it doesn't mean to be a genetic human, but rather to be a thing that has something like consciousness, reasoning, self-motivated activity, capacity to communicate, self-awareness. She says that just open reflection on what you'd be looking for in a non-human alien species to determine whether they should be treated with respect and rights will lead you towards some kind of conclusions as to these being the right attributes. Now, having said that this is what a person is like, and fetuses don't have these attributes, or at least they don't seem to have very many of them, or in any great degree until much later than after birth, she knows that some will say, but after all, they do have the potential to be a person. And shouldn't the potential by itself be sole sufficient for them to be members of the moral community, even as they await the full development of all these higher level qualities? So that's the potentiality objection, which I wrote. A fetus has the potential to be a person, even if it does not have all the qualities of personhood at first. This potential personhood should be enough to have full rights, so says a critic. But Warren says that even though the fetus does develop in the womb, physically over the course of the 9 months of pregnancy, it mostly just develops in a physical sense. It doesn't gain an appreciable measure of the sort of more intellectually complex attributes that are listed here. Certainly, a fetus in the womb is not talking or communicating, isn't even aware that it's distinct from its mother, or it hasn't even been able to experience the outside world, so it doesn't understand the concept of like its distinct identity from anything else. It's not able to act on its own. It can't direct its own motion. It's just a part of the woman's body in a sense. And then, of course, there's no reasoning. Of course, there's some level of consciousness, perhaps in the later stages of the pregnancy process, but it's still not perhaps as high level or detailed even as certain animals like that we slaughter on a farm. So perhaps a little more person-like, she concedes, but certainly not enough, even as much as animals that we kill and eat. Now, she knows there's emotional responses that people have favoring the human fetus because, it's a member of our species, and therefore we may feel powerfully or passionately attached to those things emotionally, making us want to grant them some kind of exceptional status just because they're like a person. I should say not a person, but a genetic human. But she thinks that emotional responses are not relevant in the place of like moral reasoning and logical arguments. So she doesn't cede any ground to the moral force of the emotional responses that people have. Let me read to you a little bit on page 129, where she kind of summarizes her conclusions on this point. It says here, thus, so on the left column of page 129, thus, since the fact that even a fully developed fetus is not person-like enough to have any significant right to life on the basis of its person-likeness shows that no legal restrictions upon the stage of pregnancy in which an abortion may be performed can be justified on the grounds that we should protect the rights of the older fetus. And since there is no other apparent justification for such restrictions, we conclude that they are entirely unjustified. I'm trying to find another helpful quote from the same section if I can. She says here on 128 leading to 129, thus it is clear that even though a 7 or 8 month fetus has features which make it apt to arouse in us almost the same powerful protective instincts as commonly aroused by a small infant, nevertheless it is not significantly more person-like than a small embryo. It is somewhat more person-like. It can apparently feel and respond to pain and may have some rudimentary form of consciousness insofar as it has brain activity. Nonetheless, it seems safe to say that it is not fully conscious in the way that an infant of even a few months is, and that it cannot reason, communicate messages, does not engage in self-motivated activity, and has no self-awareness. So in the relevant respects, a fetus, even a fully developed one, is considerably less person-like than the average mature mammal or even the average fish. And I think that a rational person must conclude that if the right to life of a fetus is based on its resemblance to a person, then it cannot be said to have any more right to life than, for example, a newborn guppy, which is also capable of feeling pain, and that the right of that magnitude could never override a woman's right to obtain an abortion at any stage of her pregnancy. But what about the potentiality objection? Now let's get into a more focused discussion of how she tries to respond to that. So again, what about the potential though? Does the potential the fetus has give it a right to life? Warren grants that potential personhood may give a being a weak right to life, but she thinks that that would be a right to life that would be easily outweighed by the right of the mother to have the liberty with respect to what she wants to have happening with her own body. So the bodily autonomy of the mother, who's a full-blown person, she thinks will just trump and outweigh whatever either non-existent or weak right to life that a potential person may have. To see why she thinks potential doesn't make a significant difference to the morality of the issue, she gives us another admittedly strange hypothetical scenario. So now we have the captive space explorer example, and let me talk to you about this one. So we're back with the outer space explorer. Imagine this. So you're exploring this alien planet, and you get captured by alien life forms. And what they then do is they hold you, captive. And what they intend to do with you is to turn your body into 100,000 of them. They have some weird process which will convert the matter of your body into 100,000 specimens of their alien race. Maybe this is how they populate themselves and reproduce, by capturing traveling life forms. And once they have them, they'll turn them into 100,000 of them. And that process kills the original person that was subdued and captured. Let's suppose you in this case. So you understand the very strange proposal here. You're captured by them against your will. You're held, and if they have their way, you will die and be converted into 100,000 of them. The cells in your body and etc. will turn into 100,000 of them. Now, here is her question to the reader at this stage. If you were in this scenario and you were the captured space explorer, suppose that when you were converted into 100,000 of them, that would be 100,000 people. Okay, they would be fully conscious, fully rational, self-motivated, totally able to communicate, and having self-awareness. So it's like if the process is seen through to its conclusion, you cease to exist, and then 100,000 people from this alien race become existent, deriving from your matter. Would you say that in this scenario you would have the right to escape the captivity of the aliens, or that you would be obligated to turn your life over for their sake? That's her question. And she thinks that most people who think about it at all, if you take the question seriously, will come to a certain conclusion. You understand my question? Like, would you have the right to escape from them, or would you be obligated morally to surrender your life for the sake of these 100,000 potential people? Let's see if you have an answer. Just you can put it in the chat. Well, you're saying hard to tell, Jimin, but Warren doesn't think it's hard to tell. The right to escape, Mary Jane. Yeah, that's what she thinks that most people would agree with. So think about it, right? You're already a person. And even if there's 100,000 potential people that could come to life because of you ceasing to exist, don't you think that your life and the right that you have to continue existing is so powerful that it outweighs the right of 100,000 potential people to come to be? You say you would just give up. Well, I mean, we can't answer the question only on the basis of a person's particular tendency to surrender their life. We would suppose that many people, if given the opportunity, would probably think that they'd be totally within their rights to escape captivity here and deny 100,000 potential people their own existence. So what she's saying is kind of what you're arguing or saying also, Tyler, that if you're already a person, your one right to life trumps and outweighs even the right to life of 100,000 potential persons. Now, she, I think, dramatizes the number of potential persons, making it a huge number, 100,000, to sort of make it clear that if it's okay for you to escape and prioritize your one actual person future over 100,000 potential persons future, that means that potential persons have either no right to life at all, or one that is so weak that it's very easily outweighed by an even tiny number of actual persons' similar rights. Now, anybody hearing this example, one thing you may be thinking, and it's totally fair, is you may be saying, well, but that's not exactly like all abortions, because in most abortions, it's not the life of the mother that's at stake if she were to pursue the pregnancy full term. So how does that analogy correspond to the real scenario in which a woman may choose to abort? Well, Warren knows that someone's going to say that, so she's got you with a ready response. She says, okay, well, then let's change the case. Suppose that these aliens, they don't need your life to cause 100,000 of them to exist. They just need to somehow hold you in captivity for a period of 9 months where you'll be kind of bedridden and physically burdened. But at the end of that 9-month period, the whatever materials that they gather from your body, the process will be complete. They'll have their 100,000 persons, and now you can just get up and leave without having sacrificed your life. But if we repeat the question again, do you think that you'd be obligated to surrender 9 months of time for the sake of these 100,000 potential people? Or do you still think that you would have the right to escape and deny them their lives? Then here again, it would seem that it's not just when your life is held in the balance that you would prioritize your right to bodily autonomy over the right to life of 100,000 potential persons, but even if it was just a restriction on your freedom and time. And she chooses the 9-month period, of course, because that corresponds to the period of gestation and pregnancy that a woman has in reality. So, these examples, they're pretty outlandish in a way, but she thinks that they'll help to stimulate the reader's thinking about the right intuitions. So let me go ahead and read some of that from her. She says here on page 129, suppose that our space explorer falls into the hands of an alien culture whose scientists decide to create a few 100,000 or more human beings by breaking their body into component cells and using these to create fully developed humans with your genetic code. We may imagine that each of these newly created men will have all the original man's abilities, skills, knowledge, and so on, and also have an individual self-concept. In short, that each of them will be bona fide persons. Imagine that the whole project will take only seconds and that its chances of success are extremely high, and that the explorer knows all of this and also knows that these people will be treated fairly. I maintain that in such a situation, he would have every right to escape if he could, and thus to deprive all of these potential people of their potential lives. For his right to life outweighs all of theirs together, in spite of the fact that they are all genetically human, all innocent, and all have a very high probability of becoming people very soon, if only he refrains from acting. Then furthermore, to get to the point that it's not just life that has to be at stake for this right of refusal to exist. Indeed, I think he would have a right to escape even if it were not his life which the alien scientists plan to take, but only a year of his freedom, or indeed only a day. Nor would he be obligated to stay if he had gotten captured because of his own carelessness, or even if he had done so deliberately, knowing the consequences. Some of you may have been thinking, well, the space explorers captured, so they had no consent to their role in the interaction, whereas maybe a woman had consensual sex or with her partner did that, and therefore doesn't she bear some of the responsibility for seeing the pregnancy through because she took an intentional action knowing full well that it may have led to this. But she tries to block that move by saying, I don't think our captive space explorer would be obligated to stay even if they'd gotten captured because of their own carelessness, even if they'd done so deliberately, knowing the risks. Regardless of how the person got captured, they are not morally obligated to remain in captivity for any period of time for the sake of permitting any number of potential people to come into actuality. So great is the margin by which one actual person's right to liberty outweighs whatever right to life even 100,000 potential people have. And it seems reasonable thus to conclude that the rights of a woman will outweigh by a similar margin whatever right to life a fetus may have by virtue of its potential personhood. So, she really tries her best there to block all the potential objections. So let me kind of retrace our steps, and then we'll be pretty much done with this article, and we can move to the next author in the series. So Warren begins by calling out for criticism a classic pro-life argument that says it's wrong to kill an innocent human. A fetus is an innocent human, so it's wrong to kill a fetus. She says this argument equivocates on the term human, using it in both the moral and the genetic sense. So what we really have to examine, she thinks, is what does it take to be a member of the moral community? What does it take to be a being that has full and equal rights? She suggests that what that requirement is to be a person. And she makes the further point that to be a person, it doesn't necessarily amount to being a genetic human, because it's possible to be a genetic human that's not a person, like a fetus or a vegetative coma individual. And it's also theoretically conceivable for there to be persons that are not humans, like in the space explorer examples that we were kind of discussing. She tries to stimulate our intuitions about what the criteria for personhood are by asking us to contemplate what we would have to see in an alien being for us to consider it as a person. And she thinks that that reveals to the mind on reflection the 5 basic qualities that were listed above. Now, after that, since the fetus doesn't have these qualities during pregnancy, or at least so few and in such weak degree that they don't amount to more person-like than, say, an animal, the next final issue is, what about this potentiality objection? Some will see the argument of Warren and say, despite your claim that the fetus doesn't have these qualities during pregnancy and thus doesn't have membership in the moral community and no rights like persons have, wouldn't it eventually have these attributes, and shouldn't that potential for personhood be enough to secure your membership in the moral community? To combat or to push back against this potentiality objection, she asks us to consider these last series of hypotheticals. In the captive space explorer example, one person's life could be ended in favor of 100,000 potential persons. But supposing that you were able to escape the captivity, she thinks many of us would agree that you'd have every right to do so. So much stronger is your one actual person right to life over even 100,000 potential persons' right to life, if they have one at all. And then she tries to modify the example slightly to cover these other cases. Suppose that they didn't need your life, but just 9 months of your time, or just an even shorter time period. Suppose that it's partially your own fault that they were able to capture you and you knew that you were taking risks. In all those cases, she still holds firm, and she thinks many readers would side with the intuition that the rights that actual people have are so powerful and strong that they can't be outweighed by the potential person's right to life, or even your right to liberty and bodily autonomy can't be legitimately set aside even for this huge number of potential persons. Now, let me say this as we close. What's my thought on abortion? Well, I believe abortion is morally permissible, so I'm pretty much side with the pro-choice authors. I do find pretty much a pretty good reasonable argument given here by Warren. So my thought is that abortion is morally permissible, but I'm going to teach you both sides, and I'm going to teach you all the pro-life stuff basically on Tuesday. That's when we're going to get to that next lecture. Marina, your argument, or I should say not argument, but question. Does she extend all these arguments and criteria to days-old infants? I mean, it seems to me that a 2-day-old baby would fail to meet these criteria. Okay, now that's a very good point. That's something that's been mentioned. According to her criteria for personhood, when do you become a person? Certainly not during pregnancy, but once delivery happens, it's not like automatically we have a rational, communicative, fully self-aware human specimen. So you're right that according to the contour of her argument, the newborn infant is also not yet a person, but she's aware of that issue, and she tries to say that for other reasons, it becomes wrong to kill the baby once it's been birthed. The reason that she gives is that while in the womb, there can be a conflict between the interests and rights of the mother and the fetus. But once the fetus has been delivered, there's no longer this conflict between the bodily autonomy or right to life that the mother may have and the right to life that the developing fetus would have had. So once the fetus is born, and it's no longer a fetus, but a newborn infant, there are members of the moral community that would be willing to take an interest in its protection and care until such time as it does fully develop into a mature person. While pregnant, the mother holds the right to determine whether she would like to continue the pregnancy or not. And during that time period, the survival of the fetus and her rights may come into conflict. But once pregnancy is over, there's no longer a conflict between any of the bodily autonomy or interest rights of the woman and the fetus. Because, for example, if she doesn't want the baby at that point in time, she can surrender it to an adoption agency or to the care and custody of other guardians. So, though it's not a person, and I guess according to the letter of her argument, it doesn't technically have any rights yet, it should be treated as though worthy of protection because there are vested interests placed on it by members of the moral community, and there's no longer conflicts between the mother's bodily autonomy and other interests and rights and the fetuses. So that's how she tries to meet that issue. In one part of her writing, she talked about, say, the Mona Lisa painting, okay? The Mona Lisa is something that's not a person, of course. It's an inanimate object. But it's not okay for you to destroy it because there are persons who have very powerful interests in its preservation and maintenance. So on par with that example, a newborn fetus may not yet be a person, although it soon will be as time passes. But since it's powerfully vested by interests that other members of the moral community may have, it's no longer permissible, she would argue, to destroy or terminate its life at that stage. So that's her best way, I think, of getting around that problem. But it doesn't completely solve all the issues because it means that it's only a contingent fact that the fetus that's been born, the newborn, I should say, has any kind of moral status or protection. It's kind of brought into the moral community under the umbrella of the interests that the full-blown persons have in it. But suppose we lived in a world where nobody had any such interests, then I guess theoretically it would be morally permitted to commit infanticide by her argument. So yeah, we've now, I think, talked about all the things that we needed from Mary Ann Warren. We can circle back to that later, but we have to continue with the next author in the series. So we start the abortion unit with two pro-choice authors. It was first Warren, and now it's going to be Michael Tooley. Okay, so let me tell you about Tooley. Some new author, Michael Tooley. So I'm just flipping my book to the pages where he's in the text. Yeah. Let me see if I can find the dates that he lived. I'm not 100% aware of that off the top of my head, but Michael Tooley. Yeah, so seems that he's still alive, and he was born in, I gotta get this right. Wikipedia, there we go. Yeah, born in 1941, okay, and he's an American philosopher who worked at the University of Colorado, Boulder. So yeah, 1941 till current day, still alive. Now, he wrote this paper that we're now going to study, and it's a pretty, okay, so like in the pro-choice philosophical literature and arguments, Tooley is known for having the most, you could say, radical pro-choice position possible. He goes all the way with it. His paper is called In Defense of Abortion and Infanticide. So a student just asked the question, according to Warren's argument, wouldn't it be basically morally permissible to kill a newborn because they're also not holding the qualities of persons immediately after birth. And Warren tries to block that conclusion by making the claims that I just mentioned, that there's still powerful vested interests placed on the newborn once it's been born, and there's no longer a conflict or competition between the rights of it and the mother per se. But Tooley, he makes this full-blown argument that even a newborn, at least philosophically, theoretically, does not have the status of rights, and therefore not only abortion at all stages of pregnancy, but even sometime afterward, the newborn human doesn't have the full-blown rights that we would enjoy or entertain. That doesn't mean that he thinks that in practical terms, infanticide should be permitted, but it's kind of like, it's the most consistent argument possible, because anybody who says, well, as long as you argue that abortion is permissible full term, it's not like a switch flips once pregnancy is over with. Like, why does the status change? Other authors have to try and sort of invent a reason or come up with some kind of logical basis to say that the status has changed. But Tooley is comfortable with saying that consistency commits you to saying that not only throughout pregnancy, but even for some at least short duration afterwards, there's not yet a being with rights. But we're going to try to get into it and understand all the details of his argument. So Tooley presents what many consider to be the most radical pro-choice position possible. Not only is abortion permitted at any stage of pregnancy, but in principle, he argues infanticide would be also, because the attribute or quality that confers rights status or membership in the moral community is absent not just during pregnancy, but also at birth. So let's consider his argument in greater detail. Why raise the case or the question of infanticide, that is, the killing of an infant? Well, he says it's because any defender of pro-choice is going to have a hard time giving a satisfactory argument that's consistent without grappling with this issue. The problem, again, is that you have to ask, what cutoff point is there at which abortion is no longer permissible? The cutoff should not be arbitrary, after all. And if you say that it's wrong to destroy a newborn, but not any stage of fetus all throughout the 9 months of pregnancy, then you're required to point out some morally relevant difference between the newborn and the late-term fetus. Tooley says, and I think we can all agree, that killing a normal human adult like one of us is murder, and obviously wrong, because we're members of the moral community. But he says we can identify a morally relevant difference between infants and fetuses and adults like us, even though we can't identify a morally relevant difference between a fetus and a newborn infant. Now, there's standard cutoff points that we've talked about earlier in our introduction lecture on abortion. Some people say that the morally relevant distinction is quickening. After quickening in British common law and early American law, it was said that abortion became illegal, but prior to that, it was permitted. Others thought that it was viability. Under the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court decision, it was judged that prior to viability, roughly the third trimester of pregnancy, abortion cannot be federally restricted in any state, but after viability, states can step in to try and restrict access to the service, because now you can take a greater interest in the third-term fetus's life. Others, of course, like Warren, use the birth marker as the cutoff point. Of course, after birth, Warren and other pro-choice authors would say now killing that thing becomes wrong, but prior to birth, so birth would be the cutoff or the distinguishing line in the sand. But Tooley says that none of these things confer a right to life, neither quickening, neither viability, nor birth. So what does? He's going to attempt to say. And he notes here that the plausible positions on abortion are kind of extremely diametrically opposed. If the fetus has a right to life, then that would imply that killing it is wrong always at all stages. But if the fetus has no right to life, then it would seem that there's nothing wrong with killing it at any stage throughout the pregnancy, and maybe even beyond, according to Tooley's argument. So he will now try to say what attribute or characteristic gives a being a right to life. And of course, the question is both theoretically interesting and practically valuable. Now, obviously, many react to even the thought or concept of infanticide with visceral disgust, and Tooley recognizes that. But he says that we can't substitute emotional reactions for logical argument or rational reflection, so that's why he's going to try to make this case. So a question then that he opens us up with is, what kind of being can possess a right to life? And in order to sort of explore this question, he says we should pursue two other important questions. What attributes give something a right to life is one of them. So here's two big questions from Tooley. One question, what attributes or attribute gives a being a right to life? And then the other one is, does potential or does potentiality give something a right to life? Okay, similar to the questions that sort of framed and structured Warren's article as well, but he's going to have some slightly different answers to these questions. So his first task is to try and tackle the top one there. What attribute gives something a right to life? Now, to see what features give something the right to life, observe that there are two different sorts of reasons why a thing may lack a given right. He says, consider these two claims. I'm going to write two claims, and then we're going to just engage in a little reflection on them. So claim one, a child does not have a right to smoke. Claim two, a piece of paper does not have a right to not be torn up. Okay, so look at these two claims here. The top one says, a child doesn't have a right to smoke. The bottom one says, a piece of paper has no right to not be torn up. Now, perhaps we can agree with both of these claims, but one of them he thinks is even more self-evidently obvious than the other. Like one of them, there's almost no way to challenge it, not even theoretically. So which of the two do you think stands as the more obvious of the two? Just think about that for a half second and let me know. You've got two options. One of them is supposed to be more absolutely clear. It's not number one, Tyler. Sorry, no. Because the claim that a child does not, also Marina, no. It's not number one, it's the other one. It's number two. Yes, Jemin, it's number two. And here's why, if I can explain it. A child does not have a right to smoke. Somebody out there, maybe some kind of weird libertarian, might make an argument that, hey, come on, children, we should allow them to do what they want. I mean, it used to be that we didn't have child labor laws, so the child has no right to be put into the workforce. Some people might disagree with that. I'm not saying I feel that way. Definitely I don't at all. But somebody might try to make the argument. But can you imagine anybody saying, oh, a piece of paper has every right not to be torn up? There'd be no conceivable argument that a piece of paper has a right to anything. And why is it? So does that make sense? I don't want to tell you as though I'm just dictating it to you, but doesn't it make sense that at least there's some theoretical debate that could be had with regard to number one, but there's no conceivable debate with respect to number two because a piece of paper is not even the sort of thing that is eligible for the possession of rights. Like, for example, you see this tissue? I use this to like erase notes when I sometimes will write them on the whiteboard. So this is an intact piece of Kleenex, yeah? Did I just violate rights? Did I just violate the rights of the Kleenex? It had a right for me not to do that and I broke its rights. Obviously not. It's just a silly statement to say that a piece of paper could have rights to anything. So this example, he thinks, leads us to certain reflections. The second claim, the one that says a piece of paper has no right not to be torn up, that's true in virtue of a conceptual connection. There is some kind of baseline attribute, let's label it with the letter P just because we don't know what it is yet, but there is some fundamental attribute P such that newspapers lack P and logically only things with P could possibly have rights. So let me write this here. To Marina's comment, I thought we were to just choose one that people would defend or argue, but makes sense to be two now. Yeah, well, the thing to be chosen is the one that is indisputable. And claim number two is indisputable. It's not disputable that a piece of paper has no rights to anything. The right not to be torn up is just, an example. But obviously a piece of paper is not eligible for the possession of rights because it's missing something that rights holders have to have. The question or claim about whether children have these rights does not have a right to smoke, it could be argued for by somebody who thinks we should let children smoke. Let's let them smoke. Why not? But you can't say that a piece of paper has a right to something. There's no conceivable argument to be given that a piece of paper has a right to something, and that's what's pushing us into this next comment. The comment that I put in the chat is, and this is from his essay, Therefore, there is some attribute P such that pieces of paper, for example, don't have that attribute. And you would have to have this attribute to even be a candidate for having rights. So what is it that the piece of paper is missing that makes it completely devoid of rights and 100% outside of the moral community? You know, he's got an answer. I'll definitely tell you what his answer is, but just think about it on your own. Like, what's missing? Well, you say personhood. That's fair enough, Mary Jane. That would have been, I guess, Warren's key concept, that you got to be a person to be a member of the moral community. Tooley, he takes it in a slightly different direction, but it's overlapping with that a little bit. He says that the piece of paper and other inanimate objects like it don't have the capacity to have interests. And that's the requirement that you have to even be in the realm of having rights. So it's not just life either, Tyler. Even though that's fair, yeah. I mean, the piece of paper lacks life. I guess that's fair. Yeah, I mean, if it lacks life, then it also lacks any of the other qualities that are going to be mentioned on top of life. But here's his kind of more specific treatment of that, to kind of put it in his words. The quality that the piece of paper lacks is the capacity for having interests. The piece of paper has no interest because it's an inanimate object with no life and with no sentience. So these are all kind of overlapping a little bit, but he kind of emphasizes the element of it not being able to have interest. Now, of course, if you're not a living thing and you are not sentient in any way, shape, or form, then that, of course, implies that you don't have the capacity to have interest, because to have interest, you'd at least have to be able to perceive things or feel pleasure or pain at things that you either want or don't want. So if a thing has no interests, then it couldn't possibly have rights. The piece of paper, when I tear it, I'm not doing anything that violates the interests of the paper. It's not like the paper wants to remain intact, and therefore when I tear it, I've done something that strikes against interests that it held, because it's just an inanimate object, so it couldn't possibly have any interests. So this baseline feature that's needed to be eligible for the possession of rights is the quality of being able to have interests. Now, what does that mean? Interests are kind of like desires, either for things or to avoid certain things. All of us that are now watching this lecture have an interest in our lives continuing. And you know that because if your life was threatened, then you'd be averse to having that happen. You know, you'd try your best to avoid having your life end or harmed, because you have every interest in your life perpetually continuing. But notice that the piece of paper isn't like that. It doesn't have an interest in continuing to exist or continuing to remain whole. And if a thing has no desires or interests, like a piece of paper or something comparable to it, then it couldn't possibly be having rights. So this leads to the interest principle. Yeah, so Santino, about suicide. The suicidal individual may waive their right to life by disclaiming or eliminating the interest that would be a prerequisite for having a right to life. But all of us that are not suicidal, of course, continue to have an interest in continued life. That's why we allow ourselves to keep going, and we try to keep going. So the suicide question is very good, but it's dealt with by the author. He says, when you have an interest in a certain thing, you can have a right to it unless you waive the right yourself, basically. So like, I have a right to vote, but maybe I don't want to vote and I just won't do it. That doesn't mean I don't have the right. In the same way, you can have a right to life because you're interested in living. But if you lose interest in that, or if you actually positively want it to stop, then I guess the same right that you would ordinarily have can be eliminated through your own discretion. So that's basically his kind of subtle answer to that issue about the suicide case. Just because we could become suicidal doesn't mean that we're not the type of beings that still have rights, because we're still having the capacity, at least, for the interests, even if we don't always actually, in fact, desire the thing that we have a capacity to desire. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So here's an interest principle that he writes that he derives from this. But again, let me just speak in more general terms before I write it. So to have rights, he argues that you must be capable of having interests. Let me put that in a succinct statement. So to have rights, Tooley argues that a being must be at least capable of having interests. So back to the right to life. If you have a right to life, that means that you have to at least be interested in your life continuing. But Tooley's argument is that the fetus, at least all throughout pregnancy and maybe even sometime afterward, according to him, lacks an interest in its continued existence because it doesn't have any desires, at least not yet. So to have a right to life, you'd have to be interested in your life continuing. But when you don't have any interests at all, then you can't possess the rights that would correspond to the thing that you have an interest in. The important desire that gives you a right to life is the desire to continue to exist. So to be specific, to have that right to life, you have to desire the continuation of your life. But the fetus doesn't even understand what the continuation of life means. In fact, the fetus in the womb doesn't even understand the concept of life and death. It hasn't yet experienced the world, so it hasn't yet become aware of the fact that things can cease to exist at some future time. It doesn't yet understand the distinction between its own self and the body of its mother. So because fetuses throughout pregnancy anyway lack an awareness of what it means to continue to exist, and of course they don't like actively contemplate the concept of like the cessation of life. The awareness of the discontinuation or ending of life doesn't dawn on a human person until some way later in their developmental early stages of childhood. So he says that the fetus lacks any kind of desires, including the relevant desire for the continuation of existence, and therefore doesn't have a right to life, at least not at that time in its overall development. To give another example, take, using his argument here, another example. Let's talk about the right to practice freedom of religion. So we have a constitutional right in our system that says you're free to practice whatever religion or no religion. But to have a right to practice religion, you have to at least be aware of what religion is. Would you say that the right to have freedom of religion applies to a cat, or no? No, right? And according to his argument, let's just try and think through it in his terms. Why do you think Tooley would say that the cat lacks any right to the expression of religion or religious freedom? Because the cat, with the kind of mind or brain that it has no awareness of the concept of religion. So it can't find an interest in practicing a certain religion if it doesn't even know what that thing is. Another example, us adult citizens in our society have a right to vote. But would it be even coherent to say that a dog has a right to vote? Certainly not. And not just because the dog doesn't have the ability to cast a vote, but more fundamentally, for you to vote, you have to at least have an interest in the concept of voting and participating in democracy. And dogs and other non-human animals don't understand systems of government like a democratic system where elected leadership is put into place by the decisions of the voting republic. So the denial of the voting access to a dog is not a violation of rights, because no rights exist where there's no possible interests in the content of the thing that the right is about. So he just applies the same logic to the case of the fetus, and just in general to the case of having a right to life. He says to have a right to life, you have to be at least aware of the desire to continue living. Now, me and you, we definitely know what it means to stop existing, and we passionately try to avoid that, except, of course, as you had mentioned earlier, in the case of the suicidal person. But setting that aside, with that exception noted, we want our lives to continue, and we understand what it would mean for them to end. So we definitely have a right for those lives to continue because we have an interest in the same. But the fetus is not yet aware of the facts of life and death. It hasn't been exposed to the world. It hasn't emerged from the womb. So at least during that time, it doesn't understand what it would lose if it were to lose its life. Now, if you threatened a child of even a couple years with, death, or any adolescent or young adult or full-blown adult or elderly person, they're going to passionately try and avoid that outcome because they have every interest in their life not ending, and they understand the concept of it ending. But the fetus is just not yet aware enough to understand its own existence or what it would mean for it to end. And that's why Tooley believes that it doesn't have any right to the same thing, because it doesn't have the interest in it. And you'd have to have at least the ability to have an interest in life to have a right to it. So to kind of make this a little more precise, he gives us this principle. He calls it the particular interest principle. Particular interest principle says it's a logical truth that an entity cannot have a right R unless it is at least capable of having an interest in R. Oops, sorry, one second. Just typing this out. So there's our particular interest principle. It is a logical truth that a being, this is Tooley's, view. It is a logical truth that a being cannot have a right to R unless it is at least capable of having an interest in R. So to have a right to life, you'd have to be at least capable of having an interest in the continuation of your life. He thinks that this is the right account or analysis of what it takes to be a member of the moral community with certain rights, like the right to live. You have to be able to form an interest around that thing that you have been said to have a right to. Now, he gives an example here to illustrate his reasoning on the point. And this is, I guess, the last thing I'll be able to talk to you about with Tooley, but we're almost pretty much done with him. I think you kind of understand the big picture of his argument. It's like the fetus during pregnancy doesn't have interests in anything, including the continuation of its own life. So until such time as a human being develops the capacity of awareness of its continued existence and a desire that it not end, until that time, it doesn't yet have the right to the life. And he's willing to go even a stage farther and say that even after the delivery of the baby, it still doesn't yet have these rights. So in theory, it doesn't yet have a right to life, but it still doesn't have the capacity of interests in those things because it doesn't fully understand them just yet. But I think he would probably say something on par with Warren, that even if by logical argument it may lack these rights, there are other practical and social reasons why we should not permit the execution or killing of the newborn. But this definitely would cover the case of pregnancy full term. So there's that kind of, I guess, radical strength or power that the argument has, but he really does bite the bullet and goes all the way where a lot of other writers probably wouldn't. Maybe I've got to hold you in suspense on this last example because I don't want to try and rush it with only, say, 3 minutes of class time, and I think we'll be able to give a better and more fulsome treatment of it at the beginning on Tuesday. But on Tuesday, we're going to play a little catch-up, but I think we're in good position to do that because the article by John Noonan and Don Marquis, the two pro-life authors, they're a little bit more straightforward in a lot of ways, and I think that we'll be able to cover most of them in the full meeting on Tuesday. I'll also be posting those essay prompts for you over the weekend, and then we'll talk about those a little bit on Tuesday as well. You're going to have over 2 weeks to work on them because they're still not due until the week 6. So that's where I think we'll leave it for now. But to all you guys watching, any questions or comments, reactions, anything, let me know, Chad, if you want to say goodbye for the moment, and then we can just close the stream. You asked me, Santino, what's your thoughts of concessions? Concessions. I'm not sure what you mean by the phrase. Concessions like conceding a point, or maybe you can explain more detail what you mean. I think to concede is sometimes a good thing, but it depends on what the context is and what we're talking about by the term concession. Outside of lectures so far, no, there's nothing you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be reading the book, attending lecture, and taking good notes. The only things you have to do are 2 essays and 2 tests. There's not a lot of work in the class, but they're important assignments. The first thing that is due from you is a first essay that's in week 6. You see it in the calendar in the syllabus, but I don't require people to submit little journal entries or do weekly assignments or anything else like that. What was radical about Tooley? You said his views were radical. Well, I think anybody who defends the proposition that infanticide is morally permissible theoretically is a bit of a radical position. A lot of people would say it's absolutely abhorrent to consider killing a newborn human being morally permissible. But he's like, well, logically speaking, I don't see why it would have these rights. It doesn't have more rights than the fetus has, and they both lack them for the same reason, because in either case, they don't have the capacity for an interest in continued life. I mean, maybe it's me editorializing by saying that strikes me as a bit radical, but, any discussion of infanticide, I would say, in the context of abortion could reasonably be called a bit of a, an outlier position, but it is, it's rationally defended at least. Marina, for office hours on Monday, do we just join through the Zoom link? Yeah, the Zoom link that I send out on Sundays for that particular office hour, it's just open access to anybody that wants to come on in. You can also come to the physical office if you wanted at H311A at the same time. That's where I'll be when I'm running that Zoom. Yeah. Oh, consciousness. Yeah, I feel like we are more of a single one. Oh, like so consciousness. I mean, consciousness. I would believe has to do with the brain, and I think that each individual with a functioning brain has a consciousness. Sometimes people talk about collective consciousness or like some type of universal consciousness that we all tap into. That's a bit metaphysical, kind of spiritual. I'm a little bit more scientific minded in my approach to the world. So I believe, of course, consciousness exists because I'm talking to you and you're hearing me. But I think our consciousness is individual to each person, although there are similarities between the functioning of our central nervous system. So we have certain common features between us. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if you had other thoughts about that. We could talk about it further, I guess, next time. But I appreciate the question, and I'm ready to come back to it, at any other future meeting. Anyway, though, I don't want to keep you guys late. I appreciate everyone's attendance today. I think it was another great discussion. Let me go ahead and ask you guys if you wouldn't mind for the chat to just say goodbye for now. And I'll see you guys soon on Tuesday. We'll be in touch, and I'll be posting some things, including the essay prompts, so you get started on your work. Okay, everybody, take it easy and have a good weekend. And until next time, stay safe. I'll see you guys soon. Okay.